Now, today's topic is a very interesting and cool one. It is one of the reasons why I got into this regenerative journey, and I'm sure it is one of the reasons why many people get into this regenerative journey. So I look forward to hearing more from tonight's speakers about the relationships between the health of the land and the quality of the food that we shared with our loved ones and with ourselves. Now I'd like to welcome Angel Beyde, who's going to be our fabulous facilitator for tonight's conversation, and it's going to be guiding us into this wonderful journey of nutrition. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Really happy to see such a great turnout here this evening. We're going to jump really quickly into the conversation because we have some amazing presentations. I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Angel Beyde. One of the hats I wear is with the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Eastern Outreach. I'm located in the eastern part of the province, which is the Crawford Purchase Territory area, which is the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Kanien'kehá:ka or Mohawk, and Wendake and Yonwetsio peoples. I'm near the town of Alexandria. I'm exactly on this little farm of 8 acres, and I see some of my neighbor farmers as well on this call, so that's really lovely to see. And I'm just going to turn this right over to our speakers to just give a quick introduction of their names and where they're coming to join us from tonight. Fred, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm Fred Provenza. I'm originally from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, lived in Utah for 35 years. My wife and I now reside in Ennis, Montana, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight.
Great. Craig or Shawna, do you want to jump in?
I'm Craig Cameron. I farm by Lacombe, Alberta with my wife Miriam, my in-laws Peter and Emma, and our 3 employees, Sharon, Mark, and Lilia. And our mission is to produce nutrient-dense foods to support people's health journeys. So,
Wonderful. Shawna.
Hi, I'm Shawna Lyons with the Bionutrient Food Association / Bionutrient Institute, and I am calling in today from Fort Collins, Colorado. And this is just such an honor, so thank you so much for including me, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation, so I think this is going to be really fun.
Wonderful. So without further ado, Fred Provenza, would you like to take it away?
Yeah. So tonight, what I want to talk about is a topic that you virtually never hear anyone talking about, actually. And it has not only to do with nourishing Earth, nourishing ourselves, but the wisdom of the body to know how to do that in all life that's on this planet. If you think about it, nobody has to tell bacteria, wild insects, fish, birds, or mammals how to eat, how to develop, and how to replicate. They know how to do that. When you look at domestic animals, people thought that as a result of 10,000 years of domestication, they had lost this ability to actually know what to eat and what not to eat. When you look at landscapes that can have 100, 200, 300 plants on them, we've come to realize that herbivores, goats, sheep, and cattle, are challenged to select diets from hundreds of different species. Some plant species and parts are nutritious, but others are toxic. Individual plants can be nutritious or toxic depending upon the time of day, the week, or the season, and on the resources available in the environment where a plant's growing. For instance, this paintbrush plant here, this orange paintbrush, can be totally different chemically depending on whether it's in fertile soils, infertile soils, wet site, dry site, and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make is there are huge challenges that animals face in trying to select diets. The question I want to begin with is, how do animals know how to meet needs for nutrients and medicines wild animals or domestic animals foraging on diverse landscapes when they don't have a nutritionist out there to tell them what to do, they don't have a pharmacist to tell them how to medicate, and they don't have veterinarians to medicate themselves. So how are they able to do that? And there are three facets to this whole business of the wisdom of the body. First, animals have to have access to a variety of wholesome foods. The more they are restricted, for instance, for livestock to a feedlot ration or a monoculture with only one species of plants, or for human beings to ultra-processed foods, the less we're able to meet needs for nutrients and self-medicate. Second, mother is a transgenerational link to foodscapes and landscapes. Her knowledge of what and what not to eat, where and where not to go to forage is essential for helping her offspring to get a start in life. Her influence begins in the womb through flavors in her amniotic fluid and continues at birth through flavors in her milk, and she serves as a model for what and what not to eat when her offspring begin to forage. Third, and this is a key point, no individual is an exact replica of its mother's. Indeed, we're so unique that a bloodhound can track us by our odors, and we can be identified by our fingerprints. If we took a look inside of us, our organ systems are all equally different. So little wonder then we don't like the same foods. The question is then, how do we meet needs? And that comes to this third topic, these flavor feedback relationships that enable animals to meet the needs of the body. And I want to begin by talking about that. If I were to ask you why you like a particular food, odds are you'd tell me because it tastes good. If I were to ask you why you don't like a particular food, odds are you'd tell me because it tastes bad. And that's it. That's it. It's as simple as that. But where it becomes more complex is to realize that our food preferences are being influenced by feedback from cells and organ systems. If you think about why we eat, where does food go? It feeds cells, and it's cells and organ systems that are altering our liking for foods as a function of need. So palatability is more than a matter of taste. That's the key point that I want to make. And I want to do that we did 35 years of research looking at all kinds of aspects of this topic. But very simply, this is the way that we first started to explore this whole idea of nutritional wisdom of the body. And what we did was to make animals mildly deficient in a nutrient. Then on odd days, animals, I'm going to show you a video with sheep, so let's do it. We did it with goats and cattle and sheep, all three, but let's do it with sheep. On odd days, animals in one group would get apple flavored food. Animals in the other group would get maple flavored food for a short meal, 30 minutes. After the meal, we took a stomach tube and put it directly into their stomach and drenched them with water, poured water in there basically. On even days, we switched the flavors, but now after the meal, we drenched them with the nutrient that they were lacking. The idea was, for instance, for animals in group 1, if they're forming a preference based upon rectifying the need for the nutrient, they should strongly prefer maple flavored food to apple flavored food. Animals in group 2 should strongly prefer apple flavored food to maple flavored food. And it was amazingly powerful to see how strongly animals did that in trial after trial after trial. So I want to show you a short video. 2 groups of sheep being fed straw. For those who don't know, straw is not a nutritious food. It's not good food at all, basically, a little bit, but it's not much. But you'll see one group of sheep absolutely love straw. Why? Because they received a nutrient they were lacking after they ate straw. The other group was only drenched with water. So the one group loves straw, and the other group, the other group can't figure out what's going on with it. And the first studies we did with energy. And I often think of this quote by Dave Barry. He says, what are calories? He says, calories are little units that measure how good a particular food tastes. Fudge, for example, has a great many calories, whereas celery, which is not really a food at all, but a member of the plywood family, provided by Mother Nature, so we have a way to get onion dip into our mouths at parties, has none. That's the essence of the idea. But over the years, we showed, and I'm going to make a very long story very short, that livestock respond to energy, to protein, to ratios of protein to energy, which vary as a function of needs for growth, for pregnancy, for parasite loads, and so forth. They can self-select for minerals, all those minerals there, and also for vitamins, vitamin E. There's these so-called primary compounds. These secondary compounds come under these broad categories of phenolics, alkaloids, terpenes. There's tens of thousands of these that plants produce. The details don't matter. Historically, they were thought to be toxic, and you'll often read about that for vegetables that humans eat. The key point, though, is that everything depends on the dose. Primary compounds can be toxic in too high a dose. Secondary compounds can serve as nutrients in low doses, and so they can serve as nutrients in medicines. And what we've learned is that food selection by livestock is a result of complex interrelationships amongst primary and secondary compounds. I don't have time tonight to get into the details, but the wisdom of the body is integrating information about all of those compounds during a meal. And liking for food then is a function of the needs of the different organ systems of the body. So to sum up, flavor feedback associations involve phytochemicals interacting with cells and organ systems, including the microbiome. The microbiome is a hot topic nowadays. We're constantly talking about feedback from the microbiome is altering our liking for food, and that's true. These relationships are mediated by nerves, neurotransmitters, peptides, and hormones, and that becomes the basis for the wisdom of the body. Now, I want to make a point about the microbiome to broaden this out. You would think that it's only the microbiome that matters here, but the quickest way I can do this is by relaying a story that Claire Sylvia tells in her book, A Change of Heart. She was one of the first people to have organ transplants. She had a heart and lung transplant. And the book is a story of how that changed her life. You may think the heart, as a doctor told her, is just, quote, a damn pump. It's not. When you get, as she did, the heart and lungs from a 20-year-old man and you put it into the body of a 40-year-old woman, everything changes in your life. That is to say, these cells and organ systems are carrying information that changes who you are. The only point I'm going to make related to that tonight is that her food preferences broadened to include foods she couldn't stand before, but that her donor loved, foods like peppers and chicken McNuggets and beer and so forth and so on. So these organs it gets you to thinking about, well, who is this this person I call me, basically? But it's feedback from all these organ systems, each with different needs. Central nervous system has different needs from muscles, has different needs from heart and lungs and so forth that are altering liking. So with that, let's turn to the social cultural part of things. And there's a rich literature that shows that natal preferences affect food and habitat selection in a broad range of taxa, everything from insects to fishes to birds and to mammals. They're learning in utero and early in life what and what not to eat and where not to go. We did 30-some years of studies with goats, sheep, and cattle showing that mother has a lifelong influence on food and habitat selection behaviors in her offspring. Her influence, as I mentioned earlier, begins in the womb through flavors that get into her amniotic fluid, flavors of foods mom's eating. The fetal taste system is fully functional during the last trimester of gestation. And so a young animal is already beginning to learn about the food environment before it ever hits the ground. Once it's born, flavors in mother's milk are cues as to what mom's eating. And then mother as a model becomes very important related to food selection. I could talk for hours just on that and all the work that we did over the years, but I'm for sake of time, I won't, of course. But what I want to say is that these experiences influence gene expression, this whole field of epigenetics, which is influencing form, function, and behavior. The central nervous system changes as a function of experiences in utero and early in life. Kidney function, people showed, altered rumen development. All the organ systems of the body are changing as a function of these experiences. Well, the same thing is true for humans as is true for cattle, sheep, and goats. Mother's diet in utero, experiences early in life with milk and foods, all are influencing offspring. I think the most amazing study ever done was with people, and there's been not so much research actually on people related to this nutritional wisdom of the body. But a lady named Clara Davis illustrated how culture, availability of wholesome foods, and flavor nutrient learning enable health through nutrition. In June of 1939, Clara, who was a pediatrician from Chicago, told attendees at the 70th annual meeting of the Canadian Medical Association about findings from what's the world's longest and most involved study ever done on self-selection in human beings. It was a 6-year study. She had 15 infants given up for adoption at 6 to 11 months. The infants had no previous experience eating solid foods. During the studies, her children were offered 34 different foods available seasonally, and the children could have selected a diet that didn't meet their needs if they just selected the wrong combinations, but they never did that. They all selected diets that met their needs. There was a pediatrician that was involved in this study, publishing papers. He said he'd never seen a healthier set of children in his career. Key point, no two children, the children never showed any kind of innate knowledge of what and what not to eat. They sampled everything initially, and then they would focus in on a diet that worked for them. No two kids ever ate the same foods, and no kid ever ate the same food from day to day, but every one of them selected a diet that met their nutritional needs. We did lots of studies with sheep and cattle. Again, for sake of time, I won't elaborate. They did exactly the same things. And when we wrote our papers, it was like we were plagiarizing her work, even though I'd never even read about what Clara had done. So she concludes they achieved the goal, but by widely various means, as heaven may presumably be reached by different roads. And she says, the results leave the selection of the foods to be made available to young children in the hands of their elders, where everyone has always known it belongs. Key point. And back in the day, that was true, but it's not so now. During the past century, the choices people learn to make have been strongly influenced by corporate, political, and academic elders. The food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, universities. I'm not meaning to be the big critic, but the fact is they've all been involved in hijacking the food preferences of human beings. And that's led to a pandemic of diet-related diseases whose symptoms the medical and pharmaceutical industries, for the most part, treat with tremendous expense. Nowadays, we see babies being born with transgenerational metabolic syndrome, early stages. We know, and there is a good literature on this, mothers who gain excessive weight during pregnancy, mothers who are obese, and mothers who become diabetic during pregnancy are more likely to have fatter babies with higher incidence of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And we know that the organ systems in these young children are responding and developing just as I mentioned for livestock. So it makes me think, historically, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, and they were in tune with the landscapes that nurtured and supported them. We've broken those linkages, especially during the last 100 years. I see it during my lifetime, and I ask, what price do we pay when we ignore these transgenerational linkages to social and biophysical environments in ourselves and in the animals in our care? With that, I want to turn to the last topic and briefly touch on wholesome foods, and by way of setting up Shawna and Craig, who will be coming next. And Canadian author Mark Shaxter wrote a wonderful book titled The Dorito Effect, The Surprising New Truth About Foods and Flavors. And in that book, he points out two really key things. First, the flavors of meat and produce have become blander during our lifetime, during the last 50, 70 years or so. At the same time, processed foods and ultra-processed foods have become irresistible. As a result, we've disincentivized real foods because they don't taste good, and we've made junk food all the more desirable. So let's talk about that just briefly, the topic that Shawna and Craig will develop more. You know, we know from a lot of work that ecologists have done for many, many years that resource availability in the environment, sunlight, nutrients, water, other plant species, all influence the characteristics of soils, which influences plant diversity and chemistry. Now, they were studying wild systems, ecological systems, but the same thing applies to our food systems. We know from many nice reviews and studies that the phytochemical richness of the foods we eat has declined from 10 to 50% during the last 70 years or more. That's as a function of the varieties we grow, the ways that we grow them, adding water and fertilizer, and then we pick them green and ripen them. All that has been done to enhance growth at the expense of nutrient density or phytochemical richness. And it's no wonder then, when you look at fruits and vegetables, for instance, they often look very good, but they have no flavor whatsoever. And is it any wonder then that young children don't want to eat their fruits and vegetables? As I said, phytochemical richness depends on flavor. The flavor depends on the variety of plant and the site where a plant's growing. There's a variety of corn that my wife and I very much appreciate. It's called bodacious, but that corn can taste everything from absolutely delicious to like field corn, to the most horrible thing you ever want to eat, depending on the site where we grow it on. It's simply reflecting what I'm talking about. Years ago, I was in Mexico, and we traveled to all these little backwoods places, and the flavor of the food there was incredible. And I attribute that to the way that they were growing those foods. The corn tortillas I ate there, I searched for them literally for months. When I get back to the States, they were so good. They were unbelievable. I've never had a tortilla like that. And part of what they do, and this is an old Native American tradition, planting foods in combination, the three sisters, corn, squash, and beans. I was looking at studies, and I found a study that shows those three plants are more nutritious when they're grown in combination than when they're grown alone. So it puts an emphasis on this monoculture versus mixture. And in rangelands, we know from a study just published that it was 23-year study. They had plots that either had a mixture of 16 different plant species or a monoculture of each of those species. The plants that were grown in mixture had 150 to 370 more nutrients in their tissues compared to the plants in monoculture. They also had 30 to 90% more water and nutrient holding carbon in the soil. It's amazing to see the importance of diversity. So I like to say plants turn dirt into soil, and diverse mixtures of plants turn soil into homes, grocery stores, and pharmacies for all life on this planet below and above ground. We know nothing's more important for livestock and for health through nutrition than a variety of plants. And that goes not only for the herbivores, but also for the omnivores and carnivores that would be eating those herbivores. When you look at livestock, we've learned that there are two ways for them to self-medicate. One is therapeutically after a hard night on eating too many plants that they shouldn't, or getting you infections, whatever. But what we showed, and again, long story short, we showed under all kinds of conditions that livestock can learn to self-medicate. Tannins for bloat, bentonite for acidosis on high-grain diets, dicalcium phosphate for oxalates, polyethylene glycol, on and on and on. And they learn which medicine rectifies which deficit. They go to the medicine cabinet when given choices, just like we do. Beyond that, though, animals can self-medicate in a sense prophylactically. And we know that health improves when livestock graze diverse mixtures of plants compared to monocultures. All these compounds that are in these diverse mixtures of plants are getting into their bodies, and they're enabling at the cellular level. If you think of cells foraging on what's in capillaries, cell can only forage on what's in there. And when they eat diverse arrays of plants with all these rich phytochemicals, that enables them to prevent disease, basically. They also, when offered a variety of choices, gain weight more efficiently with less emissions of methane and nitrous oxide, and they can reach slaughter conditions nearly as quickly as animals in feedlots. The last point I want to make then is to scale up to us. Plant diversity in chemistry influences the health of livestock. That in turn influences the quality of meat, milk, cheese, and meat. I'm not going to say anything about milk for the sake of time, milk and cheese, but huge differences if animals are foraging on pasture versus offered a total mixed ration in a feedlot or a dairy. Oh, I guess I did have a slide. Sorry. Anyway, I'm trying to go too fast. In Italy, when dairy cows graze botanically diverse swards as opposed to eating a total mixed ration, the flavor and biochemical richness of their cheese and meat are enhanced, and local people in Italy very strongly prefer flavors of milk and cheese from cows that are grazing on these diverse swards. The same thing is true, we're finding, for meat that's coming from wild or domestic animals. This book here, Life in the Rocky Mountains, Warren Angus Ferris makes a point about bison. He said when they were lean and not in good condition, they weren't very palatable. But as they started to select in the spring and the summer diverse arrays of plants, he said that their meat was unbelievably delicious. He said, with it, we require no seasoning. We boil, roast, or fry it as we please and live upon it solely without bread or vegetables of any kind. We never tire of or disrelish it, which would be the case with almost any other meat after living upon it exclusively for a few days. Just think about what he's saying there in terms of the quality of that meat as a function of what those animals are eating. So Stefan Van Vliet at Utah State University, I'm a cheerleader working with him, comparing meat from animals that are fed feedlot rations versus phytochemically rich diets. He's doing metabolomic analyses, which is simply a way to look at the rich phytochemical and biochemical richness of the meat, doing feeding trials for inflammation and clinical trials to look at satiety, inflammation, and health. What we're finding, we just published a paper on bison, and Shawna's going to talk much more about all these kind of things, but for bison that were fed a diet in pens, they were offered alfalfa hay, meadow hay, and corn, versus animals that were out on rangelands. These were all the same herd of animals. The animals on rangelands, their meat was much higher in phytochemicals, in antioxidants, in anti-inflammatory compounds, and there was much less oxidative stress. Interesting to me, most interesting, he said the bison in pens looked like athletes, like people, like couch potato people, right? They weren't metabolically very fit compared to the animals on rangelands that looked like healthy athletes. So the difference is due to diet and lifestyle, as with people. You may or may not realize this, but anytime we eat a meal, there's an inflammatory response in our body, with increasing odds of developing diseases when meals that elevate inflammation become dietary habits. And we typically think of pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory compounds, and we think often of meat and fat as being pro-inflammatory. But there was a study done in Australia several years ago comparing Wagyu cattle in feedlots with kangaroos on rangelands. And after people ate a meal, they looked at inflammatory markers in their bodies. When people ate meat from kangaroo, there was no inflammation whatsoever compared to the animals that were in feedlots. And so I wrote them a note and asked them if they were going to do all the studies with cattle on pasture as well as in feedlot. And they said, no, our point is, if you live in Australia and you want to eat healthy meat, you eat kangaroo. And if you've ever lived in Australia, you know you can buy kangaroo at the stores there. So to finish up there, pallets once linked people with the landscapes that we inhabited when we were hunter-gatherers. So why is human nutrition so confusing nowadays? Unlike wild domestic animals, people must be told now by authorities what and what not to eat. And if you've lived long on this planet, you know that advice changes constantly. You never know what to eat based on the latest advice. With all that advice, you'd think we'd be fit, but in fact, we're horribly unfit, and all that guidance has only led to confusion. That little cartoon says there, well, it seems your weight is perfect. You just happen to be 11 feet too short. So I'm going to show one last slide here and wrap it up. The point of this is to illustrate all the many factors that influence the choices that we make here.
We're so happy to have everyone home for the holidays. Your dad has been cooking all day.
Butter braids, bacon wrap with my famous apple sage stuffing. Who wants one?
None for me, honey. I'm on a diet.
And did you say butter braids? Because I'm dairy-free.
I'm lactose intolerant.
I'm gluten-free. No stuffing for me, honey. I'm off carbs.
I don't eat meat anymore, except for fish and chicken, just not turkey.
Is that free range?
Did it die of natural causes?
Was it an assisted suicide? Because that is the most morally delicious.
Nothing for her. She's just difficult.
Dig in.
Just have butter.
Brought to you by Canada's Liquor Corporation. Nothing says Christmas.
Okay, so they've done in 45 seconds what would take me probably 50 minutes to make the point. But that, when you get into the literature, that's such an enormous point. There are many reasons that people select the foods they do. I'm not a critic of that. I have friends that are everything from vegan all the way to carnivore. But the point I'm trying to make is that advice so powerfully influences what we perceive, how we come to believe, and how we behave. And there are so many studies that show that. I'll just give one quick example. There's that meat up there on that slide. And in this particular study, they were offering exactly the same meat to people. But if they told the people that the meat came from a CAFO, confinement feeding operation, the animals were maltreated, the people thought the meat tasted not so well. It was greasy and salty and not very palatable. If they told them the meat came from someone like what Craig's doing on his land there, of really free-ranging animals, diverse array of plants, they said, oh, the meat is delicious. We really like it. There's no difference in the meat over and over again. And that was the point of that video. We are so powerfully influenced by that. And the key point I'm trying to make then, that's not such an easy one actually, is we stopped listening to the wisdom of our own bodies and we've yielded to advice from authority. And it's not so easy as one might think to try to tap back into what is the wisdom of my body, given all the factors that influence that. So with that, I'll be quiet and very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fred. That was an incredible presentation. Lots to digest, no pun intended. I had a question for you that I thought might help segue us into the other presentations. I feel like that point about being disconnected from the body and the wisdom that it can provide. I mean, if you think about things like, you know, rhubarb or potatoes, like how did the first person figure out to eat the leaf or to not eat the leaf, but to eat only the stalk of the rhubarb, or the potatoes, that the leaves are poisonous, but the potatoes are delicious. Clearly people had a wisdom and a profound connection to what they were eating. And I'm wondering about in your book, Nourishment, which I highly recommend if anyone here has a, a book that they want to read next, I highly recommend Nourishment. And you referred in your book to Aldo Leopold, I think this is in the introduction, who was a noted ecologist, forester, and environmentalist. And you describe his work as a fervent account of how people have lost touch with nature and how our detachment is wreaking havoc on the landscapes we inhabit. And then in a later chapter, you describe how phytochemicals delight the eyes, arouse the nose, excite the palate, and nourish the cells of our bodies. So I felt like those two quotes at very different points in the book kind of connected to this theme for me about the powerful role of joy, of delight in the natural world, of pleasure and connection to our food and the people who grow it. And I'm wondering if you can speak to those themes as drivers for health. So joy, pleasure, delight, connecting to the body as a driver for human health, for planet health, for even for farming economic health.
Yes, it's a great point that you're making, Angel. I think in a way you kind of are making that point. What I think of when you say that, though, is how we've lost our connections with the landscapes that nourish and sustain us. We're members of nature's communities. We still are, even though most of us live in cities, we're not connected with those landscapes. We are still members of nature's communities. What we do to them, ultimately we do to ourselves. And I think we're seeing nowadays, we're seeing the quote bounty of the ways that we have been treating the natural systems that sustain us. And my hope is that we can all start to have a very serious think about our relationships with one another and the landscapes that we inhabit. It's fundamental to our physical health. It's fundamental to our mental health. I mentioned that I didn't mention, I spent 7 years on a ranch in Colorado 50 years ago or more. I've never felt so grounded and centered as I did during those years on that ranch. We were growing all of our own food and selling that food, from crops to livestock. We were hunting, we were out foraging. And you just felt this connection. There's a lot of, and I don't criticize people in any sense. I think you need to figure the wisdom of your own body and eat what's good. But what you come to appreciate, I think, is that plants and animals all are conscious. It's not just animals that are conscious. Plants are conscious as well. There's a rich literature, and you can make the argument even that they're sentient. So I think we need to come to realize, and you do when you're working with it, that all life is sacred. All life is sacred. We're members of nature's community. And I think we've lost that as we've distanced ourselves from our mother, basically. We've lost those connections. And, I often say, grow a garden. Even if you have a tiny bit, let the native plants come back in. Quit irrigating, fertilizing, cutting your lawn. Grow native plants that grow there. Grow a garden. Even if you have don't have a yard, grow. Start tuning back in to where nourishment comes from. So that's long-winded, Angel, but that's some thoughts related to what you said.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fred. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering if Shawna, would you be ready to hop in next?
Absolutely. Yes. Although it's a little hard to follow Fred. So that was incredible. And my mind is already just like, oh, fascinating. I need to look more into that. So let's see. I am Shawna. Oh, and I do have this controller here. I'll give you just a really brief intro into my background. I've been growing food. I usually introduce myself as a recovering organic farmer, sometimes on or off the wagon, depending on where I'm at or what's going on. I don't know where I am right now, if it's on or off. And also a backyard scientist. So I have 3 children who, fun for me, maybe unfortunate for them. I often, did little experiments, not dangerous, of course, with them, especially related to food. So I was on a homestead in Vermont. We had about 40 acres, and I noticed that in the spring, my kids would eat eggs. I could not feed them enough eggs. And then one day they would be we don't eat eggs. I mean, it'd be the next day where I'd like, you know, here's your hard-boiled egg and here's your egg for breakfast. And they're just like, we don't eat those. And I started noticing that with different things. The strawberries would come into season and, you know, their faces would be full. And then one day they'd be like, oh, we don't do that anymore. And that kind of started me, you know, questioning some things and wondering. Then moved to Colorado and was managing an 11-acre diversified farm. And a lot of the people coming to our farm, I will get to the slideshow. I'll be pretty quick, but I think this helps understand like some of my questions and where we're going. But a lot of our CSA members believed that the food that they were getting from me was better for them than what they could buy at the store. And I believed it too. And it turned out to really matter. Like we had a lot of people with very specific allergies or health conditions. And about that time, I was introduced to Dan Kittredge at one of his workshops out in Vermont. I think it was about 2012. And the things he was saying absolutely made sense to me. So I came back home, started implementing a few of the things that seemed, you know, low-hanging fruit, things I could do, changed my growing practices, changed the quality of the products that I was growing and we were eating. And again, I had this question, but can I prove it? And so then got a degree in soil and crop science and organic agriculture, still asking, you know, I didn't get any answers from that. So I've been loosely affiliated with the BFA since about 2012, came on board in about a year and a half ago, sneaking up on 2 years as an employee where I'm the partnership and community coordinator. So Craig has, I've experienced working with the people in our beef study. I saw a couple other participants popping up too that are participating. But that's how I landed here is number one, when I listened to Dan talk, it made sense. And I've always felt that the BFA, the Bionutrient Food Association, and then the scientific arm, the Bionutrient Institute, are always hopeful and optimistic. So that's, I have yet to find the hole in the reasoning or the systems or how it all works. So I'm here now and really looking forward to sharing this little bit of what we've been doing. So the BFA was founded, it's been around for over 10 years. Like I said, 2012 is when I met Dan Kittredge. And Dan, its goal and the goal of the BFA is to increase the quality of the food supply. So that's a pretty big statement, and it seems to touch every aspect of everything. So we'll just jump right in here and see what we have. Yep, increase the quality of the food supply. So in about 2017, 3 labs were created by the BFA. That's when the scientific arm, the Bionutrient Institute, was founded. We developed the BI methods, bionutrient methods, which were measuring total antioxidants, total polyphenols, and about 5 minerals. And this whole idea was we're going to collect samples from everywhere, from the gas station to the grocery store to the backyard to the farmer's market to the farmer samples. People are going to send these in and we're just going to see, is there variation in the food supply? Because Dan was like, I'm pretty sure because this carrot tastes terrible and this one tastes pretty good. So something's going on here. So over those 3 years, 3 labs were up and running and we tested over 6,000 different samples. So those were sent in, like I said, from all over. We tried to also get management data with that. And the other part of that is the goal with that was to be able to calibrate a handheld device, the bionutrient meter, for real-time assessment of nutrient quality. So this is where I keep thinking about Fred, is like, this is a tool that is just meant to allow us to trust what we already know. So like if you see something and it looks good and you touch it and it feels good and it smells good and it tastes good, you don't need a bionutrient meter. But the problem we run into is when you go to the store, you don't get to do all of those things, especially with meat. You know, you have to purchase it before you can taste it. Because if you take your kid and you give them a grape and they spit it out, fine, you're not going to buy those. But we're not allowed to taste as we go. So anyway, that was the idea with the meter. I will talk about that several times as we keep going here. So this is super fun. I'm just going to give a couple examples of what we were finding. So this is the variation of calcium by crop from those 3 years of testing. know if you guys can see my pointer, but anyway, the colored bands show the amount of variation. So where we have these little red circles on the kale, it's showing the one on the far right was the highest calcium group. I can't say the best content, like the most nutritious crop. But in terms of calcium, on the right, we have this level. And then on the left, these were the samples that were coming in on the low end. That's crazy to me to think about. And if you can see these little squares, that's the USDA analysis that if you were going to go to the store and get kale, this is how much calcium it says you're getting when you buy that kale. So those little dots, I mean, on the tomatoes, there's not a big variation in calcium. Certainly you can look at the different crops. But this was, like I said, we looked at total antioxidants, total polyphenols, and then a handful of minerals. I'm going to go to this next slide. Again, and this is just an overlay. We're looking at kale and that calcium figure again. And this is the amount of calcium and then the number of samples. So that square is showing up right around in here. So you can see on the left side, a lot of the kale samples were way less than what people would assume they're getting. But also, if you look to the right, some farmers are doing a crazy good job, and you would only have to eat one piece of kale. Like some people don't like kale. I love kale, but if you don't like it, you probably want the stuff on the right, which then again probably tastes a lot better as well. So we have that information for about 20 crops. And again, this is just an example. I just want you to really, you're not going to be able to read these. They're very small, but look at the bands. Look at how long some of those bands are in antioxidants, the polyphenols, magnesium, potassium. There's a lot of variation out there. So then what happened is we realized we can't really calibrate a meter to quality until we can define what quality is. So we're able to say there's variation, but you can't just say that something with a high potassium level signifies the most nutritious of that crop species. So then we're like, wait, we've got to figure out how to define quality. So before I get to how we're doing that, the cool part about that study, what we did for variation, is in what we call the Data Explorer. It's an online database. You can access it on our website, and you can play with this, and you can filter through with crops and then the different management practices or bioregions. You can look at specifically just a mineral or other nutrient content and play with that. So that's been a huge thing too with Dan, is it's so important for him that all of the data lives in the commons. So like anything we do goes out to the public. So this is, like I said, this is live. You can still do this. It's super fun. And then this little thing here I love with, because it starts with the consumer and then it ends with the consumer and everything in between. I mean, I think it's so important that it starts with the consumer's choice and then it ends with what is best for the person. And let's see, consumer choice, a real assessment. This is, again, one of the things I believe is the future of food is when we will start to assess the quality of food based on its nutritional content rather than the metrics of how it was grown. So I have no problem with labels and trying to understand where your food is coming from. I think that that has made huge changes in a lot of ways, but I think that sometimes we miss what I call is the freedom and creativity, and like the beauty of farming is if your hands are tied and or your boxes are already lined up for you of what you can do. I mean, I think we'll hear from Craig, and I can guarantee you there's going to be some beauty and creativity in what he has decided to do with his farm. And I think that sometimes if we're giving people boxes to check to either do or not do, we're missing the mark. And so I think and believe that if we start identifying quality as nutritional content, then we open the doors. I mean, we've got stuff to learn from conventional farmers, from organic farmers, from bio. I'm not going to list them all to you, but everybody is doing something really cool. And like we saw along those on the graphs with our variation testing, if you go through and you start filtering by organic practices or no-till or tillage, it would be lovely if they all lined up and everything that was organic was always on the right side. It's not the case. So we have things to learn across the board. And the journey is very fun. Are we moving here? So that led us to the definition of a nutrient dense quality product, which I always laugh. I'm like, of course we started with beef. Like, why not a potato that's easy to transport? Like, you don't have to freeze it. You can get it across like the international systems pretty easily. But no, we went with beef. So in this study, we were asking ranchers to send in soil and forage or feed samples, manure samples from the cattle, 3 ribeyes representative of the animals that had been feeding those food items, and then some of those were actually continued on in human health trials, and this is with Dr. Van Vliet that Fred mentioned at Utah State. So he is the head of this project for us. And what we are finding with the preliminary, we figure we're just about halfway or maybe a little over halfway done with this project at this time. But the greater the plant species diversity in the diet of the animals, just like Fred was talking about, the greater those variations in nutrient content in the meat product and then transferred into the human diet. So this is just a location of the farms that have participated in the beef study across North America. We also have samples from 3 other continents as well. So look, there's Canada. We got some farmers up there. That's you. Okay. And okay, I'm not moving. Okay, here we go. So again, these are preliminary results, but this is in general what we're seeing. So this is on the left side is that omega-6 to 3 ratio. In general, a lower number there is considered beneficial to human health. And across the bottom axis here, we are looking at the number of plants on pasture. So number of plants in the animal's diet or in this cattle's diet. So we found that as the number of plants increase, and I don't think we had anybody with over 20 in there, but that omega-6 to 3 ratio it correlates with a lower omega-6 to 3 ratio. And that's exciting, but it gets even more exciting than that. Okay, this is the part that I get all excited about. And I think Fred would probably like this too. Probably Craig, yeah, everybody will like this. But we're also finding that soil produced metabolites are being transferred from the soil, from the fungi to the soil, to the plant, to the animal, to the humans. And we're able to trace that because they're only produced in certain soil environments. We say like a reflective, healthy soil environment. So we're able to see these levels. Ergothioneine is one where that concentration continues to increase in the grass-fed versus the grain-fed community. Again, this is another example of showing those plant nutrient transfer to the animal, which then we're able to measure. Again, I love these. If this looks like a line, but the arrows, if you follow the arrows, it's a loop. It's not a line, it's a loop. The idea is that regenerative practice appear to have beneficial impacts on all of these systems, which then loops back around and then increases farmer resiliency, farm prosperity. Even we've seen not a cost of living increase. That would be a bad idea, but standard of living increase for farmers. So this looks like a line, but again, this is a loop. We've seen benefits in soil health, increase in plant diversity, increase in water quality, ecosystem functions, livestock well-being, and nutrient density. And I can't see the other one, but I'm assuming it's going to be human health under there. It's hidden. Or I know it is. Let's see. So the mission of the BFA, we have two arms. One is the Bionutrient Food Association. That's our educational and outreach component. And then we have the Bionutrient Institute, which is the scientific arm. So how these two work together is the Institute dives into research to give hopefully practical recommendations for farmers looking to create a nutrient dense product. And then the BFA does the farmer education, consumer education, and outreach based upon those results. So they're really, they support each other, and it's so exciting. But I think like the part I wanted to make is like, as soon as you ask one question, like my question was just like, is this food as good as the grocery store? You know, like it seemed like it was going to be really easy answer, and it's not, because then there's another door, and then there's another question, and then there's another thing. But really wanted to just thank the people who, number one, contributed to the variation testing. Those are over 6,000 samples, and those are people, citizen scientists going out, buying from different grocery stores, different things, collecting, sending those in for us to be able to analyze. And you know what? We had a little bit of funding for our beef study, but I don't know that it was a majority, but a lot of ranchers have paid, donated to the research in order to participate. And that to me is amazing. I just think people are curious. They want to do a good job. And I love it that people are stepping up to help see that through. So thank you so much again for having me here. I think that is the end of my yakking for a little bit.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shawna. That is extremely exciting and inspiring work. And I just love that kind of Russian doll image of a question inside a question leading to another question, which unleashes a whole other set of questions. Yeah, it's really inspiring. I'm wondering, we actually had a question, or we had the theme of food sovereignty come up in the chat. And as I was listening and as we were preparing, I was really interested in your role as partnerships and community coordinator at the BFA. And I'm wondering if your work has connected with any food justice focused partners, or do you see this as a possibility in the future of this work? And how might this work to support the production of nutrient dense food also cultivate partnerships in support of communities who don't have the means to afford higher quality food from regenerative farmers?
Love that question, and thank you so much for asking it. We have people reaching out often with desires for testing, let's say school lunch programs or other facilities where the food, like hospital settings or even prison settings, like, you know, is this where all of the food that doesn't measure up going to land? And to me, that was something I was wrestling with as well. But if you ever talk to Dan Kittredge, there's no question in his mind that this is going to be just fine, because actually, if we think about it, and this is where I was excited to point out that square of where the USDA averages for the nutrients is. I thought, what if instead of an average, that's now a baseline criteria of what has to be produced going forward? What if instead of saying we're still going to continue to produce this garbage, there are so many things that for you to be able to put it on the shelf, you have to be able to prove what it is. And I would like to argue that a carrot that doesn't meet a standard isn't food. And my hope is, and you know, nothing ever moves as fast as I would like things to move, but the idea behind educating people and farmers is that as you implement regenerative practices or biological practices, whatever those are, your farming inputs become less. You're able to, you don't have to raise your prices and require a premium for that. I would really love to see, as people do start to vote with their money for better quality things, those prices won't have to continue to go up. Hopefully, farmers can make a decent living, ranchers can be paid a decent living wage, and that standard is increased across the board. So my hope is that at some point we say, if it's garbage, let's label it garbage. And then if it's food, that's what we're going to be feeding people. So I don't know that that's a collaboration per se. Like I said, we have people reaching out, but there isn't a lot of money. People, I'm being recorded. There's not a lot of money in some sense for this testing. So, and maybe that was part of too why I was really thanking the individuals for contributing, because sometimes we do, we have someone we're talking with right now who wants to test her local school system, and that's going to come out of her pocket. The school's not interested in test. Maybe they're interested, but I don't think that they have the funding in there. So, partnerships around that on education, educating growers, educating consumers, and then trying to raise that baseline of just let's grow. Let's remember what we're doing. We're growing food, which, as Fred mentioned, is also pharmaceutical. Like, it's not just a hobby or like the thing you grab on your way out, but maybe there needs to be a little bit of reverence in what we're doing and what we're consuming as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shawna. You really connected a lot of different pieces, and I see there's some questions popping up in the chat, so it's great. We'll turn to those at the end. Craig, I wonder if you're ready to go next.
Yeah. Yeah, I did my intro. Thanks, Angel. I did my intro a bit earlier, but I guess I would say that we produce regenerative, forage finished Piedmontese beef. And the reason we say forage finished is because we are wanting to grow them on these diverse mixtures of forages. So we didn't always farm that way. At Peony Farms, we tried to produce the best for our customers, and we thought we were until my daughter's health needs forced us to take another look. When my daughter was born, she suffered complications that left her with severe health challenges and long-term disabilities. And as a result, she doesn't take her food by mouth and instead takes it through a gastronomy tube or a G tube directly into her stomach. The benefit of that is that we don't have to worry about what to try and get her to eat like we do with our son, but we can choose the foods that she gets to eat. And so we were looking for foods that would support her in achieving the best health outcomes possible. Miriam and I came to agreement that we should be feeding her a homemade blend of whole foods instead of the commonly used commercial formulas that were available. But we still had a point of contention, which was that Miriam was convinced that grass-finished beef was going to be better for in our daughter's blends than the grain-finished beef that we were raising. My experiences as in certified organic industry, I'm a recovering organic farmer too. Our experience with that made me wary to believe that just because it was labeled grass finished, that it was actually a better product. We didn't resolve that disagreement, and Miriam ended up going with her gut, left our farm and went to get meat from another rancher that was grass finished. And that was a big ouch. I was frustrated because I wanted the best for my daughter too, and I wanted to be the one that was producing that for her. So I started researching, and it seemed like everybody that was talking about nutrient density and researching nutrient density was connected to this thing called regenerative agriculture. And the data seemed to show that my initial reaction was correct. Not all grass-finished beef was created equal. Early work from the Bionutrient Food Association and Dr. Van Vliet was seeming to indicate that the most consistent nutrient density in grass-finished beef was from these animals raised on a diverse mixture of plants. And so if that was going to be the best food to benefit the health of our daughter, our family, and our customers, then I had to be the one producing that. Okay, so great. Now I knew what I wanted to produce, but how the heck was I actually going to do that on my farm? In the conventional and organic production systems that I had farmed in, there were established criteria and cultural norms of what a good farmer should look like. In the regenerative space and in the forage finish space, there was no agreed upon criteria of what that good farmer looked like. During this transition into regenerative agriculture, I also started working with a business coach, shout out to John Roderman, to try and become a good businessman as I was on the same journey. It took quite a few coaching sessions, but eventually John helped me realize that there wasn't a specific set of practices that would make me a successful business person. What it came down to was, I am not changing my slides here, sorry. What it came down to was whether or not I was living from my values. After one session in particular, I was looking over my notes and it hit me. Values are important for ag and food production too. I married this new realization with 3 other truths that I was recognizing in the regenerative ag systems. Number 1, that humans are a part of the system. Number 2, that the systems are very dynamic. And number 3, that these systems have feedback loops that both the other speakers have mentioned as well. Altogether, this formed a way of thinking in my head that now I've put into this diagram to be able to visualize it and share it with others. In nature, humans are a keystone species and an apex predator in a lot of ways. So everything we do or even don't do affects the system in some way. Since values are so important to our decision making as humans, those values are the real driver and foundation of the food system. My experience with my daughter changed my farm values to focus on human health down at the bottom of that diagram there. Then from there, I set goals and choose tools that I think will result in this healthier food that I want to make. But with the complexity and differing context of each farm, and even from field to field on our farm, making regenerative agriculture farming in those situations really comes down to trying things and then seeing what happens. Thankfully, these systems have a lot of feedback loops that we can monitor. And I just have kind of the one set of arrows on there to indicate that they exist, but you could have arrows all over the place if you really wanted to. We can monitor these feedback loops to make sure we're moving in the right direction. This can be as simple as visual observations, looking at the soil, looking at the plants, looking at the animal. Are they healthy? Are they not healthy? Or as like Fred was saying, tasting it, or the experience of eating it, all that. However, we found in our experience trying to make these foods, that there are some health factors that have an impact which we can't see on that level. And there's also some things where we can see it, but we don't know what exactly is going on. And that's why we also use testing to monitor a number of these feedback loops. So on the left there, we've got soil testing. Second one, we've got sap testing based on what's going on in the plants. Third one there is live liver testing, and it's very non-invasive, not painful at all, but gives us super interesting data about what's going on in the animals and from what they're eating and how that's affecting their nutrition. And then on the right there, we got feed testing. We also do genetic testing for our Piedmontese breed on factors like tenderness for the eating experience. And then working with the Bionutrient Food Association now, getting a little bit of product testing information there. There's a lot of interesting things that we've learned from doing all this testing. And I think specifically for this discussion, one of the ones I want to point out is that managing calcium in the soil seems to be one of the most important factors in the nutrient density of the products we're producing. When we are getting our calcium available, we're not only getting more calcium in our plants, but we're also seeing more micronutrients, particularly copper and zinc, which that calcium is helping bring into the plants. The importance of monitoring multiple feedback loops is also a really big deal in the case of calcium management, because it's not just about adding more calcium. We have a ton of calcium in our soils that is just been tied up from our old practices that now we have to look at releasing and making available to the plants and the animals. One of the ways that's been really pivotal in us being able to release that calcium is through balancing the humic acid and fulvic acid ratios in the soil based on a test that's done by Future Analytics in Red Deer. And a shout out to Melissa, who developed that unique soil assessment. And we can adjust those humic acid to fulvic acid ratios by an application of a good humic acid product, or just through converting our raw manure, which is high in fulvic acids, into composted manure, which is higher in the humic acids, before we apply it on the soil. We also saw release of calcium from our soils, growing plants like Phacelia in our blends, in our forage blends. That species of plant is good for helping to release calcium, as well as doing applications of magnesium to our magnesium, borderline deficient magnesium soils. The soils have a higher affinity for the magnesium and will actually release calcium and grab onto those magnesium things. Long-term goal, and I've been doing a lot of reading and researching on this, is to try and get that soil system functioning. And I think it's achievable from what I've read, where the soil system biologically and chemically is converting the fulvic acid products into humic acid and keeping the calcium cycling itself. We've seen from our feed testing and liver testing that we are getting really good results from what we're doing on the calcium front. We've been able to reduce our calcium supplementation to 0 just on having enough calcium in the forage crops. And we've seen a little bit of movement on some of these other minerals. And we anticipate that as we keep getting the system healthier, we'll be able to reduce a lot more supplementation on those other minerals as well. So how does this affect the nutrient density of the beef we're producing? On this, I guess I should move that. What our feedback loop's telling us. We sent samples to the Bionutrient Food Association in November of 2022. We had samples from our last batch of our grain finished beef products, and then the first batch of forage finished animals that we were just kind of playing with this idea. And we wanted to see, like, what are the differences? And so some of the key differences were that the forage finished beef had 3.5 times higher omega-3s, had 20% higher iron, and 7% higher calcium than our grain finished samples. We have no doubt that this nutrient density will continue to improve as we've seen more optimization in these other levels of our production. And we are working out details to get some more product testing done this fall to see kind of how that progression has been over the last 2 years. And I'd love to see, we haven't quite got our results for phytonutrients yet, but I'm super excited to see what that looks like coming out in the future. As we continue in our mission to produce nutrient-dense foods to support your health journey, we would love it if you joined our newsletter. One of my personal core values is curiosity, and so I am always asking questions, trying new things, and connecting people in learning about food and farming. So all you have to do is go to the website there, sign up, and you'll be in that group hearing all the updates and that type of thing. You can also follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. It's all right there. And I want to thank you all for your time. And yeah, it's been a great chat this evening.
I love it. It's incredible to see all of the ideas and research and theories and philosophy that has come through from Shawna and Fred, and then seeing it taking place live on your farm. It's wonderful. It's very exciting. And also, I think that is the tallest purple vetch I've ever seen in my life. You look very proud for good reason.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Awesome. I have a question prepared, but I also just wanted to say I was very excited, that you talked about how our soils contain a lot of calcium. I feel like this message that the earth is not stupid and it's not lacking in anything. It's that the systems are broken and therefore things are locked up and tied up and bound. And if you start activating that joyful chemistry and have everything talking to each other and having things converting from fulvic acid into humic acids, aging in manure, just really respecting the fact that these are living biological systems, there's a wealth of calcium there. Even I saw there was some humble little dandelion buds in your forage mix that was being tested, and right, dandelion's wonderful for sending down that taproot and bringing up calcium as a dynamic accumulator. Anyway, so I'm nerding out, but I'm just very excited. I feel like it's a message that is often not shared, that the earth is not a stupid, inert thing that you need to fix up in order to nutrify your animals or yourself. It's a question of having that curiosity, that wisdom and humility and love to get to understand the systems and the relationships that provide us with abundant life and good health. So yeah, just a little props to your curiosity and determination to get familiar with those relationships and refresh them back into functioning as they are meant to. So anyways, a long digression, but quickly, time check. We're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask, in terms of your recognition that having some core values as opposed to a strict set of regenerative practices is what was really going to make your farm successful and kind of honor your dedication to your daughter's health. I'm wondering if you see these practices of like delving into your values and really digging into the nitty-gritty of your farm and making all your decisions based on like the driving value or values. Do you see this as a hopeful path that's achievable for a broader range of your peers? Because you have a very inspiring but kind of lightning bolt origin story of how this change happened on your farm. And that's something that really went straight to the heart of your family. So do you think that there is support needed for your farming peers to be able to dig in the same way and start this regenerative journey in their own farming businesses when, as we know, it's very hard to make a living farming?
Yeah. So I would say that this combination of values and testing isn't just achievable. I think it's necessary. So one of there's kind of three reasons why I think that. One is that the values and testing piece connects the context to the practices, I think, in that like lots of people can come and copy all my practices and it won't work for them because they have a different context. They have a different situation that they're in, like whether that's rainfall or whatever. And so being able to know what they're trying to achieve and then be able to test the feedback loops to see if that's the direction they're going, I think is very important. And that's from a garden scale to like our large scale situation as well. The second thing is that understanding values helps with human relationships. Working with in-laws is really difficult, but if we know that we have this shared human health value, we're able to work out some of these other things because we know the goal that we're striving towards. And then the third thing is it provides motivation for us to overcome challenges. It's really, in some situations, it'd be really easy to quit. But when it's like, oh, I'm doing this for this value of better health for people, it makes it really a lot easier to overcome those challenges that would normally make you want to quit. As far as support, it is possible to like do some of this stuff yourself, read books. Like Brené Brown has a chapter in her book, Dare to Lead, that talks about kind of figuring out what your values are. The biggest thing for me has been having that coach to be able to bounce some of these things off of and get that. That's another feedback. Just sometimes I have blind spots and I need someone else to see what that feedback is supposed to be. And no matter which approach you take, the most important factor, I think, is to be honest with yourself. If you're not honest with yourself, you can do all this stuff and the process won't be helpful. So those would be my kind of key things that I would say to someone that's interested in that.
Amazing. And I love that big part of your sort of business research is the coaching, but also, for example, Brene Brown, who's really well known for her work on vulnerability. And that is a cornerstone of leadership in regenerative ag is really inspiring. We're at 8:27. I'm just going to give a quick lightning round question to Fred, Shawna, and Craig. If there's one piece of agricultural policy that you could see realized in the next 3 to 5 years, what would it be? Anyone can jump in popcorn style.
I'll say really quickly, I think it's promoting the kind of things that Shawna and Craig are talking about. Policies through the Farm Bill here in the US, for instance, that encourage those kind of practices.
Nice. Craig, is there any policy you wish you had to support your work, or Shawna, yours?
I guess.
Oh, go ahead, Craig.
I guess for me, I see bigger than policy is just consumers voting with their dollars on what they value. And if their values connect with certain farmers that have those values, that's where the magic happens.
Wonderful. So maybe policy that would support consumers who are already facing sky-high grocery bills, perhaps more subsidies and support so that you can choose those farmers who reflect your values and grow the kind of food that you want to eat. Shawna.
I was going to say something very similar, is that I really think the change is going to come from the people. I think anytime we've seen a policy, it gets, has to go through so many different regulations and hands before it actually gets to the people it's trying to benefit. I would love, again, if we had a baseline of quality, and I don't know that will happen next year, or the next 3 to 5 years. But I would love that. I would love to.
That's on your wish list.
That's on my wish list. And I know we're short for time, but it was so fun to hear Craig and watch him smile. I'm like, this is the part I love about farming, is like when you can be creative and you have the freedom to try these things. So that it was wonderful. So I'm excited about that.
Amazing. We had a couple of questions that came through on the chat. One of them was about the Emily, you asked about calcium plant indicator. Was it actually the Phacelia maybe that Craig was talking about? I don't know that that's a calcium plant indicator. For myself, I often think of dandelion as an indicator that calcium is bound up in the soil, but would that be maybe related, Emily, to the Phacelia?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What was the plant? The Phacelia, you say? How does it
Yeah. I can put in chat, or somebody else can. Maybe Craig, do you want to just stick it in the chat? Sure. It's a lovely plant, very pretty also, as well as being very useful. Yeah, Alix put it. It's great for cover crop mix. It's a lovely plant. Bees love it. It's one of those kind of stacking function things in permaculture. It serves a lot of purposes.
It's awesome. I had also earlier a question for the Bionutrient Food Association. I was wondering if it's still possible to send samples to be tested, or is there places, because that's what the kind of thing we'd love to do, because we're transitioning to, we are currently having grain finished and grass finished in the same location. And yeah, I was wondering if there's studies still going on and if we can join and send sample somewhere?
Yes, so we have two things going on. The variation testing that I talked about in the beginning. We have closed our lab, which was in Michigan, and we are now partnering with Chico State. And they are on hold for about 6 months. And this is for crop testing, about 20 different crops where you can see where you land on that scale of variation. But they're just recalibrating. They have new equipment and they are planning to be up and running in about 6 months. So that you can check back either on the bionutrient.org site or the Bionutrient Institute.org site. And then as far as the beef testing, we are still accepting samples for the beef study. That is again by donation at this time for ranchers. And it costs just over $2,500 for those three, or for the soil and forage, or the feed, the manure, and the meat samples. And Craig, and oh, go ahead.
No, I was just listening.
Okay, so that on the Bionutrient Institute site, I think maybe they're posting that in the chat, the link to that. There's a beef interest study. You can go in there and fill that out, and then I'll reach out with you and we can talk about your sampling plan, that type of a thing. But one thing I want to make sure, it's not a fee for service lab. Like Craig was mentioning the years, like in the past where he sent in samples and he's still waiting for some results. This is a research project. We're trying to define nutrient density. We're calibrating machinery. We're developing new methods and protocols. I mean, it's a big deal. It's super exciting and really fun. But if you want your results tomorrow, you won't get them. But you're part of this really cool community that gets to like talk about this stuff and figure it out and share ideas.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll keep in touch.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, we've gone over time with the incredible enthusiasm and generosity of these presentations. We had a great question in the chat. If you could recommend one book, would it be? If people want to type into that thread, I see my internet connection's unstable. Hopefully you can still hear me. But yeah, I just wanted to close this by saying thank you from the heart for these beautiful, knowledgeable, wise, and inspiring presentations. I hope that folks here are leaving well-nourished with some food for thought and some practices that they might want to investigate for their own farms. I really thank Regeneration Canada for inviting me to facilitate these amazing conversations. This is the third one I've done, and they just get more and more exciting for me. I am really happy to meet all of these folks and to see so many people dedicated to learning about how to take care of the earth and make a decent living and feed people well. So yeah, good vibes. Thank you.